The sleepy town of Springdale, Missouri had always been a peaceful oasis, a quintessential American small town where everyone knew their neighbors and life moved at a leisurely pace. 17-year-old Caleb Reynolds had grown up in this idyllic setting, spending his days hanging out with his best friend Jenna, exploring the woods behind their homes, and dreaming of the day he'd finally graduate high school and venture out into the world. But on this crisp autumn morning, a palpable tension hung in the air. Something was off. As Caleb stepped outside to fetch the newspaper, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had been gnawing at him since he woke up. Caleb's neighbor, the elderly Mrs. Henderson, was slowly making her way down the sidewalk, her movements unnaturally stiff and jerky. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," Caleb called out, but the old woman didn't respond. In fact, she didn't even seem to acknowledge his presence. Curious, Caleb approached Mrs. Henderson, only to recoil in horror as she suddenly whirled around, her eyes vacant and her mouth agape, revealing yellowed, rotting teeth. Before Caleb could react, Mrs. Henderson lunged at him, her gnarled hands grasping for his flesh. Caleb narrowly dodged the attack, his heart pounding as he backed away in terror. "Mrs. Henderson, what's wrong with you?" he cried, but the old woman paid no heed, single-mindedly pursuing him. Caleb turned and ran, his sneakers pounding the pavement as he raced back to his house, slamming the door behind him. "Jenna, Dad, something's wrong with Mrs. Henderson," Caleb shouted, his voice laced with panic. His father, a retired police officer, emerged from the kitchen, his brow furrowed with concern. "What happened, son?" he asked, but Caleb was already pulling open the door, desperate to warn the authorities. The scene that greeted them was one of pure chaos. Neighbors were fleeing their homes, some screaming in terror, others stumbling about with the same eerie, lifeless movements as Mrs. Henderson. Caleb watched in mounting horror as those who were bitten or scratched by the undead quickly succumbed to the mysterious affliction, rising back up as mindless, flesh-hungry creatures. "We need to get out of here now," Caleb's father shouted, grabbing his son and Jenna and ushering them back inside. As they barricaded the doors and windows, the sounds of shattering glass and inhuman growls filled the air, sending a chill down their spines. Huddled in the living room, the small family listened helplessly as the once peaceful town descended into a living nightmare. Caleb's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Could this be some kind of twisted prank, or was it real? The sheer ferocity of the undead attackers and the speed with which the infection spread left no doubt. This was no ordinary crisis. After what felt like an eternity, a sudden pounding on the front door made them all jump. "Help! Let us in!" a voice called out. Caleb's father cautiously peered out the window, then quickly unlatched the door, ushering in a small group of terrified survivors. "It's happening all over town," one of the newcomers, a middle-aged woman, gasped. "Those things, they're not human anymore. We have to get out of here." Caleb looked to his father, his eyes pleading for guidance. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice trembling. His father's expression was grim, but resolute. "We fight," he declared, "or we run, but we're not going to just sit here and wait to become one of them." As the undead horde continued to amass outside, the small group huddled together, bracing themselves for the fight of their lives. Caleb knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The zombie apocalypse had begun. The roar of the undead grew ever closer, their relentless moans and guttural snarls sending chills down Caleb's spine. Barricaded inside his family's home, he huddled with Jenna, his father, and the small group of terrified survivors, all of them acutely aware that their makeshift sanctuary wouldn't hold for long. "We need to get out of here now," Caleb's father said grimly, his eyes scanning the room for any means of escape. "Those things won't stop until they've torn this place apart." A gruff voice spoke up from the corner. It was Mitch, a grizzled older man who had managed to find his way to their doorstep. "I've got a truck parked a couple blocks away," he said. "If we move fast, We might be able to make it out of this hellhole. Caleb felt a glimmer of hope. Then what are we waiting for? He asked, already moving towards the door. But his father held up a hand, his expression stern. Not so fast. We need to be smart about this. Those things are everywhere. We'll be sitting ducks out there. Jenna spoke up, her voice quivering. So what do? We can't just stay here and wait to be torn apart. Caleb's father considered this for a moment, then nodded decisively. All right, here's the plan. Mitch, you take the lead. Caleb and Jenna, you stick with me. We move quickly and quietly, and we don't stop for anything, you hear? He paused, his gaze sweeping over the group. This is our best shot. Let's go. Heart pounding, Caleb followed his father and the others as they cautiously made their way out of the house and onto the devastated streets of Springdale. The scene that greeted them was one of pure horror. Zombies shambled aimlessly, their blank eyes fixated on any living thing that moved. Caleb felt his stomach lurch as he witnessed their neighbors, friends, and even children succumbing to the infection, becoming part of the ravenous horde. Mitch led the way, his eyes constantly darting left and right as he navigated the treacherous terrain. Caleb gripped Jenna's hand tightly, his knuckles turning white as they weaved between abandoned cars and smashed storefronts, praying that the undead wouldn't catch their scent. Suddenly, a thunderous crash echoed from behind them, and Caleb spun around to see a group of zombies spilling out of a nearby building, their oozing jaws open wide. "Run!" his father shouted, and the group broke into a desperate sprint, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. Caleb's lungs burned as he pushed himself to the limit, his legs aching with every stride. Jenna was struggling to keep up, her face contorted with terror. Caleb couldn't bear the thought of leaving her behind, so he grabbed her arm and half-dragged her along, urging her to move faster. Up ahead, Mitch had reached the truck, its engine already roaring to life. "Get in, get in," he yelled, waving them towards the open door. Caleb's father practically shoved Jenna and Caleb into the back seat, then leaped in himself, slamming the door just as the first of the zombies reached the vehicle. With a squeal of tires, the truck lurched forward, leaving the horde of undead in its wake. Caleb sagged back against the seat, his heart pounding in his ears. They had made it, but at what cost? As they fled the devastated town, Caleb knew their troubles were far from over. The zombie outbreak had spread like wildfire, and the entire country was now in the grip of a living nightmare. Their only hope was to reach the nearest major city, where they might find safety and perhaps a chance to fight back against the relentless tide of the undead. Caleb steeled himself for the challenges that lay ahead, determined to survive no matter what. The truck rumbled down the highway, leaving the burning ruins of Springdale behind. Caleb stared out the window, his mind reeling from the horrific events that had unfolded so quickly. What had started as a normal day had turned into a living nightmare. His quiet hometown transformed into a battleground against the savage, flesh-hungry undead. Sitting beside him, Jenna was visibly shaken, her usually vibrant eyes now filled with fear and uncertainty. Caleb knew he had to be strong, not just for himself, but for his best friend. Reaching over, he gently squeezed her hand, offering a reassuring smile. "We're going to be okay," he said, though even he wasn't entirely convinced. "We just have to make it to the city. That's where we'll find help." Jenna nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. "I hope you're right, Caleb. I don't know how much more of this I can take." Up front, Caleb's father and Mitch were deep in conversation, their voices low and urgent. Caleb strained to hear their words, catching snippets about the scale of the outbreak and the desperate scramble for safety. "The whole damn country's gone to hell," Mitch growled. "We need to get to Chicago fast. That's gotta be our best shot at finding a secure place to hunker down." Caleb's father nodded, his brow furrowed with worry. "I just hope we're not too late, if those things have already overrun the city." The unspoken fear hung in the air, thick and palpable. Caleb swallowed hard, trying to push away the image of Chicago, once a vibrant, bustling metropolis, reduced to a zombie-infested wasteland. As the miles ticked by, the signs of the outbreak's devastation became increasingly evident. Abandoned cars littered the highways, many still bearing the ominous streaks of blood that told the grim fate of their previous occupants. Caleb caught glimpses of the undead, shambling aimlessly along the roadside, their soulless eyes fixed on the truck as it sped past. Finally, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the towering skyscrapers of Chicago came into view, but the sight that greeted them was far from a comforting one. The city's streets were in chaos, with panicked civilians fleeing in all directions, pursued by hordes of the undead. Mitch gritted his teeth, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "Shit, it's already too late. We're not gonna make it." Caleb's father leaned forward, his eyes scanning the scene with a mix of determination and dread. "We have to try. If there's any chance of finding a safe haven, it's there." With a nod, Mitch pressed the accelerator, and the truck surged forward, weaving through the gridlock of abandoned vehicles. Caleb gripped the seat, his heart pounding as they narrowly avoided collisions with the terrified civilians and the relentless undead. As they approached the city limits, Caleb's gaze was drawn to a massive, heavily fortified structure in the distance, a last bastion of human civilization amidst the chaos. "Look," he exclaimed, pointing. "There, that must be it." Mitch nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That's gotta be the place. Hang on, kids, we're almost there." The truck careened towards the fortified walls, its occupants praying that they would find sanctuary within. As they drew closer, Caleb could see the heavily armed soldiers stationed at the gates, their weapons at the ready. With a deafening roar, the truck screeched to a halt at the entrance, and the small group spilled out, their faces etched with desperation. Caleb's father stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Please, you have to let us in," he pleaded. "We've got to get away from those things." The soldiers regarded them with a mixture of caution and sympathy, their weapons still trained on the newcomers. After a tense moment, one of the soldiers stepped forward and gestured for them to enter. "Welcome to the last stronghold of humanity," he said grimly. "You'd better get inside. Fast." Caleb followed his father and the others through the gates, his heart racing with a mix of relief and trepidation. They had found a refuge, but at what cost? As the massive doors clanged shut behind them, sealing them off from the zombie-infested world, Caleb knew that the real fight for survival was only just beginning. The towering walls of the fortified city provided a sense of safety, but Caleb couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of his stomach. All around him, the desperate faces of the other survivors told a story of loss, fear, and a dwindling hope for the future. As Caleb and the others were ushered deeper into the city's stronghold, he couldn't help but marvel at the sheer scale of the operation. Heavily armed soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their eyes always vigilant for any sign of the undead horde that gathered outside. Makeshift shelters and supply depots had been hastily erected, housing thousands of terrified civilians. Caleb's father approached one of the soldiers, his expression grim. "Our town was overrun by those things. We barely made it out alive. Is there any way we can help?" The soldier, a grizzled veteran with a weathered face, nodded solemnly. "We're doing everything we can to hold the line, but resources are running dangerously low. If you've got any useful skills, we could use the extra hands." Caleb's father glanced back at the group, his gaze settling on Mitch. "We've got a few able-bodied folks here. What do you need us to do?" The soldier gestured towards a towering structure in the distance, its windows dark, and its doors firmly sealed. "The medical research facility is where we've been trying to find a cure for the infection. Our scientists are working around the clock, but they're in desperate need of supplies. If you're willing to risk it, we could use a team to venture out and retrieve what they need." Caleb's eyes widened, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. "A cure, you mean? There's a way to stop this." The soldier's expression darkened. It's our only hope, but the city is overrun, and the facility is right in the heart of the infected zone. You'd be putting your lives on the line. Caleb's father turned to the group, his face etched with a grim resolve. We've come this far. If there's a chance to stop this nightmare, we have to take it. Mitch stepped forward, his gruff demeanor belying a glimmer of hope. I'm in. This is our best shot at taking back our lives. Jenna gripped Caleb's arm, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. I'm with you, Caleb. We have to try. Caleb nodded, squeezing Jenna's hand in silent acknowledgement. Then let's do this. The soldier led them to a small armory, where they were outfitted with weapons, body armor, and a map of the treacherous route to the medical research facility. As they prepared to set out, Caleb couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. The journey would be fraught with danger, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Remember, the soldier warned, the undead are relentless, and they'll stop at nothing to get to you. Stay alert, move quickly, and don't let your guard down for a second. Caleb took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle in his hands. We understand. We're ready. With that, the small team of survivors set out, their faces etched with a steely resolve. Caleb walked beside Jenna, his gaze constantly sweeping the abandoned streets for any sign of the undead. The eerie silence was only broken by the occasional moan or the distant sound of gunfire, a grim reminder of the horrors that lay ahead. As they approached the towering structure of the medical research facility, Caleb felt a surge of adrenaline. This was their chance, their best hope of finding a way to end the zombie apocalypse and reclaim their world. Whatever dangers awaited them, he was determined to succeed. The medical research facility loomed before them, a fortress of steel and glass amidst the devastation that had consumed the city. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest as he gripped his rifle, his eyes constantly scanning the area for any sign of the undead. The group moved swiftly and silently, keeping to the shadows as they approached the heavily fortified building. Mitch, the grizzled survivalist, held up a hand, signaling for them to halt. We need to be extra careful here, he whispered. There's no telling what kind of defenses they've got set up, or how many of those things are lurking around. Caleb's father nodded, his brow furrowed with concentration. All right, listen up. Mitch, you and I will take the lead. Jenna, Caleb, you two stay close and keep your eyes peeled. We can't afford any mistakes. The group advanced, their footsteps muffled by the eerie silence that pervaded the area. As they neared the entrance, Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. The doors were barricaded, but the sounds of movement and muffled voices could be heard from within. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed from behind them, and Caleb whirled around to see a horde of zombies spilling out from a nearby alleyway. They've found us, he cried, raising his rifle and firing. The others quickly followed suit, their weapons blazing as they tried to hold back the relentless tide of the undead. Caleb's hands trembled as he squeezed the trigger, his heart pounding in his ears. The zombies were closing in, their snarls and guttural moans filling the air. We've got to get inside, Mitch yelled, his voice barely audible over the din of the battle. This way, hurry. The group made a desperate dash for the entrance, firing as they went. Caleb felt a surge of relief as they reached the doors, only to be met with a heart-sinking realization. They were locked. No, 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 Jenna cried, her voice shrill with panic. We're trapped. Caleb's father wheeled around, his face a mask of grim determination. Keep them back, he shouted, rushing to the door and frantically searching for a way to open it. Caleb and the others redoubled their efforts, pouring a hail of bullets into the advancing horde. But for every zombie that fell, two more seemed to take its place. Caleb's ammo was running dangerously low, and he could feel the fatigue beginning to set in. Just as they were about to be overrun, the doors behind them suddenly burst open, and a voice rang out. Get inside, quickly. Without hesitation, the group surged through the entrance. Caleb ushering Jenna ahead of him. As they stumbled into the relative safety of the facility, Caleb caught a glimpse of their savior, a tall, slender woman with fiery red hair and a fierce expression. "Close the doors," she barked, and Caleb and the others rushed to comply, sealing out the undead horde. Caleb collapsed against the wall, his lungs burning and his heart pounding. Jenna was at his side, her eyes wide with terror. "What now?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Caleb's father stepped forward, his expression grim. "Now we find this cure, and we take back our city." The woman who had let them in approached, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I'm Dr. Vera, the head of the research team. We've been working around the clock to develop a cure for the virus, but we're running out of time and resources." She turned to the group, her eyes filled with a desperate determination. "If you're willing to risk it, we need your help to retrieve the final components we need to complete the serum. The fate of the entire city rests on our success." Caleb felt a surge of resolve. They had come too far to give up now. "We're in," he said, his voice steady. "Lead the way, Doctor." As the group followed Dr. Vera deeper into the facility, Caleb knew that this was their last, best chance to turn the tide of the zombie apocalypse. Failure was not an option. The atmosphere within the medical research facility was charged with urgency. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an otherworldly glow on the sterile white walls. Dr. Vera led Caleb, his father, Jenna, and Mitch into a large lab buzzing with frantic scientists. They were immersed in the complex world of beakers, vials, and computer screens displaying critical data about the zombie virus. "We're close," Dr. Vera said, her voice a mix of excitement and exhaustion. "But we need a few key components to finalize the serum. One of them is stored in the central pharmacy across town, which has already been compromised." Caleb exchanged worried glances with his father and Jenna. The prospect of venturing back into the chaos was daunting, but the fate of countless lives hung in the balance. Mitch stepped forward, his rugged features set in determination. "When do we leave?" "Immediately. We can't waste any time," Dr. Vera replied. She began distributing gear and weapons to the group, each item a small comfort against the overwhelming threat outside. As they prepared to set out, Caleb felt a mixture of hope and dread. They had the potential to save thousands, but the danger intensified with every step they took toward the pharmacy. The team of 4 moved out, stepping into the chaos of the city once again. The streets were a war zone, echoing with distant gunfire and the blood-curdling moans of the undead. The first few blocks were eerily quiet, but Caleb stayed alert. Every shadow felt like a lurking threat. "Stay close," his father warned, leading the group through a narrow alleyway covered in debris. Just as they rounded a corner, the sounds of grunts and growls grew louder. Suddenly, a group of zombies appeared, their eyes glazing over with hunger. "Fire!" Mitch shouted, prompting the group to raise their weapons and unleash their fear and fury. Bullets flew, marking a frenetic dance between the living and the undead. The sheer visceral reality of the fight pumped adrenaline through Caleb's veins. Pushing forward, they managed to clear a path, and the pharmacy sign flicked into view. The tension in the air thickened as they dashed toward the entrance. They hesitated outside the door, knowing the risk of the undead laying in wait. Caleb's father took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm going in first. Cover me." With their rifles aimed, Caleb and the others followed cautiously as his father kicked the door open, revealing a scene of chaos. Shelves were overturned, broken glass crunched underfoot, and the flickering lights added to the eeriness of the place. "Quickly, the shelves should have the antidote components," Dr. Vera shouted, her urgency igniting a fire within Caleb. They spread out, grabbing whatever they could find while constantly checking over their shoulders. Caleb's heart raced as he rummaged through the wreckage. His hands landed on a few vials marked antidote components. It was nothing short of a miracle. "Got them," he exclaimed, holding them aloft for the others to see just as the unmistakable shuffle of zombies filled the air. "Time to go," Mitch shouted, taking point as Caleb and Jenna rushed back towards the entrance, the vials clutched tightly in Caleb's hands. The sound of gnashing teeth and desperate moans grew louder, sending adrenaline coursing through their veins. As they erupted back into the street, the scene was grim. The zombies were swarming. Caleb looked around, panic rising within him as he surveyed their surroundings. "What do we do now?" "Head to the alley," Jenna urged, pointing to a narrow passage just beyond their position. They barreled forward, barely dodging the outstretched arms of the undead. It was a frantic sprint as they maneuvered through the alley, their lungs burning. Just when Caleb thought they might escape, one of the zombies lunged from a side street, and he stumbled back. Mitch reacted immediately, shoving Caleb out of the way while aiming his weapon at the creature. A single shot rang out, echoing down the alley. "Keep moving," Mitch urged, glancing back as they pushed through the chaos. Caleb's heart raced, but he could already taste the hope that this mission could bring. They were closer to producing the cure, closer to saving lives. Once they reached the stronghold again, they burst through the gates, breathless and shaken. "We did it," Caleb shouted, the weight of the vials in his hands feeling like precious gold. Dr. Vera's eyes sparkled with fierce determination. "Now we finish what we started. Let's save this city." As they prepared to synthesize the cure, Caleb felt the sense of urgency wrap around him. Their struggles were far from over, but they now held the key to fighting back against the consuming darkness. Hope surged through him. This was their chance to reclaim their world. The hum of machinery filled the air as Dr. Vera and her team worked tirelessly in the lab, transforming the components Caleb and his group had retrieved into the first doses of the cure. Every moment felt like a race against time. The city, and the remnants of humanity within it, depended on their success. Caleb huddled with Jenna and his father outside the lab, their nerves frayed from recent encounters. "Can you believe we made it back?" Jenna said, her voice wavering slightly. "I thought we were done for when that zombie lunged at us." Caleb nodded, remembering the visceral fear that had gripped him in that moment. "We fought back. We didn't give up." Just then, their attention was drawn back to the lab, where the distinctive sound of clinking glass mixed with muffled conversing filled the air. Caleb felt a surge of hope as the lead scientist approached, holding up several small vials filled with a shimmering luminescent liquid. "We have the serum," Dr. Vera announced, her voice echoing with triumph. "We're ready to begin distribution." The room erupted in applause. Hope reignited in the hearts of the survivors gathered. Yet Caleb knew the battle was far from over. "How do we get this out to everyone?" he asked, looking to Dr. Vera. "The city is heavily fortified, and while we have more allies than ever, there are still pockets of infected civilians out there," she replied. "We need teams to take these doses to those who are still trapped outside the walls. The distribution plans must be swift and focused. Our window of opportunity could close at any moment." Caleb's father stepped forward. "We can lead a team. We've faced the undead before. Let us help." Dr. Vera nodded, visibly grateful. "We've already established relays for communication and planned out potential routes." Mitch joined the conversation, his demeanor serious. "Count me in too. I know these streets better than anyone else. I can help navigate." The following day, fortified with weapons and the precious doses of the cure, Caleb, Jenna, Mitch, and other volunteers departed the stronghold. They traveled in a convoy of several armored vehicles, armed with high-caliber rifles and a resounding sense of urgency. As they dug deeper into the outskirts of the city, Caleb could see the devastation wrought by the outbreak. Buildings lay in ruin, cars were abandoned with doors flung wide open, and the stench of decay hung heavy in the air. It was a somber reminder of the battle they were fighting, not just for survival, but for the reclamation of their world. The convoy stopped at the first designated drop-off point, an apartment complex teeming with terrified survivors. They disembarked, forming a protective perimeter to shield the civilians from any potential zombies lurking nearby. Caleb approached a small group of people huddled together, their faces gaunt and weary. "We're with the medical team. We have something that can help you," he said, holding out the vials. The crowd stirred, disbelief flickering in their eyes. One woman stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Is it true? Can it really cure them?" Jenna nodded, stepping in to reassure them. "Yes, it works. We've seen it in action. But we need you to get everyone together. We can only help if we distribute it quickly." As they began administering the serum to the sick and infected, the immediacy of hope blossomed around them. Caleb watched as one by one, the pale faces transformed from fear to optimism. Those who received the serum began to regain color, their eyes flickering with life. Hours of frantic work passed. They moved from building to building, tirelessly mobilizing resources and administering the cure wherever they found pockets of survivors. Caleb felt renewed purpose, seeing people who had been on the brink of despair light up with the promise of a future. However, the team faced challenges that tested their resolve. Occasionally, they encountered small groups of zombies that had slipped through the cracks, forcing the volunteers to fight for their lives during their missions. Each encounter left Caleb and his friends bruised but resilient, their determination never wavering. With the city slowly awakening from its nightmare, the survivors they helped began banding together, sharing supplies and forming informal communities. Weeks turned into months, and the cure was now being mass-produced in the city's lab. Caleb and Jenna stood at a lookout point on the city's walls, gazing out over the gradually reclaiming landscape. The once dominating dread of the apocalypse was beginning to lift. They had fought through unimaginable challenges, and together they had made a difference. "This isn't just survival," Caleb said softly, his voice firm with newfound conviction. "We're rebuilding." As they surveyed the horizon, the sun began to set, casting golden rays over the horizon. The long, hard road ahead was fraught with challenges. Months passed, and the once desolate streets of Chicago began to pulse with life again. The survivors, rallying together in a newfound unity, forged a resilient community amidst the ruins. The fortified walls of the stronghold had become a sanctuary, not just for those who had escaped the zombie menace, but for those who believed in rebuilding a better future. Caleb stood on the outer battlements, the evening sun casting a warm, golden glow across the cityscape. He felt a mix of pride and wonder as he observed the bustling activity below. Children played where destruction once reigned, and people built gardens where debris used to be. The steadfast hum of machinery echoed through the air, with new businesses springing up to meet the community's needs. "Can you believe this?" Jenna said, her voice filled with disbelief and awe, as she joined him on the wall. "Just a few months ago, we were fighting for our lives. Now look at us." Caleb smiled, his eyes sparkling with hope. "It's incredible. It feels like we're waking up from a nightmare." They both turned as footsteps approached, and Caleb's father joined them, his expression beaming with pride. "All thanks to you two, and everyone else who fought so hard to reclaim our city. The vaccination clinic just opened its doors for the second round of vaccinations. It's almost packed to the brim. People really are coming together," Caleb said, his mind drifting back to all the lives they had saved along the way. "Not just here, but across the country," Caleb's father continued. "We're seeing survivors banding together in other cities as well. The connections we're forging now will be crucial for the future. A future that can thrive based on hope instead of fear," Jenna chimed in. "Imagine what we can build together." But as they stood there, a shadow crossed Caleb's face. A disquieting thought gnawed at him. What about those who didn't make it? Those who were lost to the infection? Are we really safe? "Life will always carry risks," his father said with wisdom etched in his furrowed brow. "But we can't let our fears dictate our future. What we've accomplished here is proof that humanity can prevail." Suddenly, a loud clattering noise erupted from below, causing them to turn their attention to the main plaza. A group of armed patrols had gathered, their expressions tense as they looked towards the farthest edge of the city. "Is something wrong?" Caleb asked as he and his father exchanged concern-filled glances. A soldier rushed up the stairs, breathless and urgent. "We just received a report. There's a large group of survivors approaching the gates. They claim they have information about a possible cure variation and need immediate assistance." Caleb's heart raced, not just from the soldier's urgency, but from the sudden thought that the fight was still far from over. "Let's go," he said, the fire of determination igniting within him. As they descended to the plaza, the trio arrived just in time to see the new arrivals. Weary but hopeful, the survivors walked through the gates, led by a tall woman who carried a banner emblazoned with the words *, "Together we stand." *. Dr. Vera stood at the forefront, her presence commanding as she approached Caleb and the others, eyes bright with excitement. "We found something. Listen," she began, detailing the discovery of a fast-acting serum that not only halted the undead transformation, but could potentially enhance the immune system against similar future infections. "This could change everything," Dr. Vera stated, addressing the mingled crowd. "Our knowledge can prevent any similar outbreaks from happening again. We can potentially reclaim entire regions of the country." A murmur spread through the crowd as the weight of her words sank in. Hope echoed in the air as survivors processed the implications of what might lie ahead. Caleb glanced at Jenna and his father, seeing their readiness reflected in their eyes. "Can we do this? Can we really reach out and help rebuild?" With a smile, Jenna replied, "We don't just have to survive anymore. We can thrive. Together." Caleb squared his shoulders, drawing strength from the unyielding spirit that had seen them through their darkest days. The community would not shy away from the challenges ahead. They would face them as one. As evening descended on Chicago, the lights of the community began to illuminate the sprawling landscape. Caleb stood amidst the assembly, a sense of invincibility washing over him. This was no longer about survival. It was a new dawn for humanity. A chance to create, to heal, and to shape a better future. With hopeful hearts and unbreakable resolve, they united under the banner of resilience, ready to forge a brighter world, aware that the trials they had faced had only made them stronger. Together, they would reclaim their world. Together, they would rise.